so happened that I was the first PhD student of Department of Neurophysiology. The fact that I was the only student put some sort of pressure on me, because this machine was operated here, and most of the lectures were given either in English, occasionally in Russian, and I remember one or two in French. But the point was that technical stuff, it was a bit late, and the other thing, the technical stuff did not have the grasp of the foreign languages. So the fact that I could sort of understand what those people were saying, so I was assigned to operate the projector. And so that was my position, and although Bolek, Srebro, who came following here, and somehow he managed to avoid this position, so I was the main operator for years. But I couldn't stop making some sort of silly comments on the side, especially that my friend and mentor, Lord Kozak, he was prone to the similar sort of type of non-serious behavior, and we were exchanging those silly jokes, and this was, today was some of the ideas were, like today, the center, say, the fear, and what happens when you have the anti-fear. Now, if you have fear, you either freeze or escape. The consummation of fear or is the freeze or escape. What happens if you have the anti-fear? You are the center of non-fear. Means what's the consumatory index, the reflex. And we were, Vlad and I were making some, what we thought, funny speculations.
I was a student of psychology, and Teresa Górska was a lecturer or led a seminar for psychology students. I was really fascinated. This is the place I would like to work. So we, three of us, were sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy. But what was interesting, that we always attract attention of Konorski. He would ignore sometimes one of the docents. He wasn't in the good terms, or he didn't do what Konorski thought was appropriate or interesting. But he would always ask us, what did you read? What did you do? And he was really attentive to young people. When I had sort of like exam for PhD students, he would ask me not only what I read in neuroscience, but what is my favorite literature, what do I listen to as favorite music, and so on and so on. So he was really very attentive to a person as a whole. When the meeting was over, the young people had to leave the seminar room, and of course Bogdan would leave, and Eva, the other doctor, would leave, and I would try to find something to stay around with the grown-ups. And Konorski said, "Panie Bolku, pan też ma iść." I was involved in avoidance learning, and we planned experiments. And I presented this experiment, and Konorski was sort of scratching his head, said, "Okay, how much does it cost?" Because it involved that the shop should build some equipment. Okay. And then the experiment was total flop. We didn't get any results. And I came to Professor and had to acknowledge that the experiment didn't work. And Professor said, "I knew it won't work, but I wanted to learn that you learn that you have to take responsibility for the experiment." So the only restriction was how much did it cost. If this was too expensive, he would stop such experiment that he wouldn't accept. Konorski was very astute as a person, political person. In fact, he was in trouble because being declared in one of the leading newspapers in Soviet Union that his theories are a renegade from Pavlov theory, he might have been thrown out from academy, might have restrictions in in freedom of moving, and so on and so on. Thanks to Professor Dębowski, who was the head of the whole institute, and at the same time, president of Polish Parliament, very distinguished scientist, Dębowski protected Konorski over those difficult years. And then they came the political changes in the 50s that I mentioned, which were extremely important, because Konorski was, after the war, he was spent several years in England writing his first book. And he was always on the list of suspect person. So Konorski had a problem with his revisionism of Pavlovian theory and his longer stay in England. Konorski was lucky that he escaped from Poland at the beginning of the war, and through his acquaintances from Pavlov laboratory, he got position in Sukhumi, a laboratory in Georgia that was famous for its primates colony. There were some famous experiments made in Sukhumi on primates. So Konorski spent entire war period in Sukhumi, and he worked in the laboratory when the Germans were coming closer to Volga. The laboratory was moved, and Konorski worked for a while in a military hospital, taking care of patients. Not everybody knows, but Konorski was trained as a medical doctor. He never practiced, and maybe good for the patients, because he didn't pay attention much to the health, his own also including. So at that time, first time, he really experienced people with brain damage and dramatic agnosias, aphasias, and all other deficits. And as you know, this was also the beginning of neuropsychology in France and in England after the First World War, when many of the soldiers could survive wounds or trauma in the head because they're antiseptic conditions, and they were walking around with deficits that were difficult to diagnose. So it started all the aphasiology and neuropsychology in France and England, but also Konorski experienced this during the war in Russia, and he kept this interest to the very end. He created a little group of aphasiologists, including a neuropsychologist who came from Russia, was trained by Luria, a famous Russian neuroscientist, neuropsychologist, and in fact also a famous Polish lexicographer, Stefan Doroszewski, who was also interested in aphasia. He was a member of this group. So this was interdisciplinary group that was trying to make a new classification of aphasias, a new classification of agnostic deficit. This was my only experience of a genius, simply a genius, because he was interested in many things. He had incredible capacity to absorb the knowledge and incredible ability to penetrate the problems. I'll give you an example. One of the famous American psychologists came and presented his data and said, you know, I have all this data, I don't know what to do without it. And within 10 minutes, Konorski will summarize this data and tell him what to do with this data. And the guy was just shocked. There was 500 American psychologists on the way to Moscow that landed in Warsaw. And only top of them, this was American Psychological Association charter plane that stopped in Warsaw on the way to Moscow. And on the top of those psychologists, including Neil Miller, Solomon, Rescola, and Wagner as students at that time, Pfaff, there were really in this seminar room was such density of expertise that one felt that is it possible to collect in one room so many experts?
He had some saving in United States after his visit and some tantiums from the book, and he asked Professor Stellar, who was at that time rector of the Penna University, because he knew, Professor Konorski knew already that he's very sick, so it was a kind of agreement that this money should, if he asked him to keep this money for the time when then they can be used for something important, equipment or some stuff which would be really crucial, in his opinion, for the department. And this is how we actually got the first two computers for electrophysiological experiments. One was in Andrzej Wróbel, I think. Yes, it was. And internet is left. And it was thanks to George Gerstein, who really, together with Stellar, decided that this is time when this money should be used.
It was strong snow, and we left this building, and I start to go before Professor, just making a hole in the snow, and Professor was just going after me, following me, and suddenly he said, "Dear Wiesław, you are giving the new way for Polish neurophysiology." Thank you.
Well, you might not remember, but the Wednesday seminar started always at 4 p.m. This is why we have started it at 4 p.m. And this was a long tradition. Professor Konorski always used to say that this is the seminar which was held in Leningrad by Pavlov, also at 4 p.m. And why 4 p.m.? Because well, Wednesday, of course, but why 4 p.m.? Because till 4 you should work. And then you can have a pleasure to discuss. So nowadays, it's I'm very pity that there are no younger colleagues on this hall, but nowadays they not only press Professor Kuźnicki, the follower of Professor Konorski in the Department of Neurophysiology, to move the seminar date for 3 o'clock so they can go home earlier, but they often go away just after the presentation. Actually, when the seminar was started at 4, we were waiting for this co-referate, co-presentation, as Julita has just said, because the very boring seminars could suddenly appear completely new. And we were waiting till 7, 8 o'clock many times just to hear how he can present the same data in a completely different way.
I would like to say of Professor Konorski as a director of this institute. And what was very interesting, in my opinion, he was so good director because he had tremendous experience as a man, as a people, as a scientist. First of all, he was a psychiatrist. Everybody here not say anything about him. But he started as psychiatrist and worked 3 years in the hospital as a normal physician. Then he was 2 years with Pavlov, with absolutely other society. And this is also tremendous experience. When you read, the autobiography of the Konorski, you find what's important at him. You see, all my career started, in matter of fact, when I'd been in Pavlov laboratories. Then he came to Warsaw and started to work at the Nencki Institute of Experimental Biology before the World War II. Then he had also such experience when he worked in Soviet Union in his, station at Sukhumi as a director, also as director at Warsaw. Then he come back, and in matter of fact, institute was rebuilt just as they have nothing in which way they start. So that was tremendous human experience. What's happened when here in Warsaw, when I was one of the vice director in this institute, Konorski said to me, Leszek, Panie Leszku, so that's they say. I would like to know only what is really important from the institute. Every other things, I know that you can do it without me. And that was just the general principle, how they can do it. But now is the one question I ask you. What, in matter of fact, during this year, was the most important things here in this building, in this institute? To find the space. And where is the problem is the space? Then immediately Konorski say, oh, this is important problem. And I must find solution from this problem. With this institute, we must not forget about Liliana Lubinska. Because Liliana Lubinska was just the person who teach Konorski anatomy, who teach Konorski really the basic neurophysiology and neuroanatomy. And I hope without this collaborating, starting in 1933, in matter of fact, also was continuous during the period in Soviet Union, Konorski never be so good. But when he mentioned, they say, Kahal and Sherrington, these basis people who really, make neurophysiology as the great science.
I have just looked that you are going and reading the book with the name Bioimaging on it. This is our main sponsor. So I should probably mention the money which we got for this symposium, and I would like to thank all of the participants, and with some of you we will meet at 7 here. Thank you very much.